Hey there! Welcome to episode 44 of an ongoing series where we basically take the camera anywhere we want, and we try to find secrets and new discoveries to some of our favorite games. This was a long time requested episode, and thankfully now I have the free time to actually do it. So with that said, let's get going. So, the first thing I want to say is that there's a spoiler warning, mostly visual stuff if that doesn't bother you, but this episode's also going to be mostly zoom outs, because this game in particular just has some of the most gorgeous zoom outs I've ever seen in a video game. And a lot like the Dark Souls episode, there's a lot of consistency in where the environments are, and I'll be going over that in just a little bit. But for now, you're looking at the title screen of the game, which is shocking to me because the Monado itself is actually just a 2D texture, and they didn't just use an in-game field. It's a visual trick to look like one, most likely to save on loading time so you can start your game faster. Okay, so here we have the opening prologue with Mechonis and Bionis, and a lot of people want to know what's going on with this scene in particular. Now, while there isn't anything too funny or goofy with the scene, if you zoom the camera out, you can see exactly where they are in this scene, which is standing on a platform of square ocean surrounded by a skybox of ocean water and clouds. Alright, now we're in the opening scene with Dunban and Dixon. And one of the really cool things that you can see in this game a lot is that to manage crowds in its game, they have 2D textures off in the background. Really low res 2D textures. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to slow down the footage here and we're going to move the camera into the back. And here you can see some mechon that are not so pretty on the eyes. Now, despite the fact that there's practically a million cutscenes in this game, the designers did a really good job of making pretty much everything outside of the camera's view pretty clean and consistent with what the scene had intended. But in a few rare cases, you can find weird stuff like here with Mumka, and his right arm just snapping into the back for, I don't know why.
Just come and get the Monado when everything's quieted down a bit. That thing's gonna be mine!
And amongst my viewers, there was a little bit of confusion as to where you are exactly in this prologue scene, so I zoomed the camera out just to show you that it's on the Mechonis sword, which you do revisit later in the game, and I do believe there's a reference to it as well, but just in case there was any doubt, here's one of those amazing zoom outs. Now, I did say that this episode's going to be a lot of zoom outs, which I'm sure many of you wouldn't mind, as one of my show's biggest complaints is that I don't do enough of these. So now you're going to get too much. What we're looking at here is Colony 9, and our starting point is where Shulk starts the game. So when you're in-game miles away from your own colony, you can see that when you zoom the camera out, the entirety of it's always there, which is pretty amazing, but man, you have no idea. We have such sights to show you.
Wow. No matter how many times I see this, I never get used to it.
So when you finally get to leave the colony, you get a first look at just how insignificant you are to the world around you. And they make a point to say that you're on the knee of Bionis. Now here's the fun part of this episode. Every time we zoom out the camera in these certain areas that tell you that it's a certain part of the body, you'll find that it's in almost perfect relation to where it should be on the body, which is clearly indicated by a giant Mechonis and a giant Bionis. And what's awesome is that despite the fact that these models actually look pretty great, because you visit all the areas that their bodies are supposed to be made up of in the game, you could still consider these the low poly versions. We actually got to see how the map looked like zoomed out, but here it's just a flat texture. Now, the world of Xenoblade is seemingly massive and interconnected, but let's not lose our heads though. Every area in Xenoblade is still a map. And so, for example, here when you're about to enter the Gower Plains, I don't know if I pronounced that right, I'm sorry, you can find a loading zone. However, if you jump over the marker that loads that map, you can continue walking down the path that's supposed to convince you that you're heading to Gower Plains. And if you make it all the way to the end of that path, well, say hello to the end of the earth. And what happens if we jump down there? Well, the map to the caves that led up to this area are all part of this one loaded map. So if we were to jump down, we could actually land back into the cave. Now we got ourselves a beautiful zoom out of Gower Plains. And this is where the game really starts to impress me. Now, when I was playing this originally on the Nintendo Wii at 480p, I knew there was a gorgeous game behind that muddy resolution, but I had no idea that zooming out the entire environment would prove to be one of the most breathtaking experiences I've ever had on this show. With the exception of grass and enemies, just about everything that you see is fully modeled and it's there in real time. Even areas that you wouldn't be able to see, like the top of those half arches, those have textures on top of them. Now, normally in video games, you would see nothing on the top. You save yourself on resource management by making no textures whatsoever in the areas that your players can't see. But Xenoblade does not take this route in almost any given moment. And what you get to see in one frame is the entire world that they crafted that takes several minutes to walk from the start of to the end of. So you might notice that a certain Bionis keeps getting in the way of the shot. Yep, you guessed it, both Mechonis and Bionis are always fully rendered in the shot as well. I know a lot of people are really impressed with the zoom outs for Skyward Sword, but I think this one takes the cake. It really makes you wonder how they managed to pull this off on a Wii console of all things. So here's some different perspectives of what a boss fight looks like, and that's cool and everything, but we've been doing a lot of zoom outs, and we're going to continue to do more. Let's try to find something interesting. So if we take the camera below the ground level, you can see that the tentacles that this boss shares on the ground actually has frayed wires at the end of each one, as if they were destroyed at one point. Now here's one of my favorite areas from the game, and it has to do with a couple of things. One is that the music's really nice. The environment has this nice pale blue color to it. It's very reminiscent of a certain area from Dark Souls 2. So naturally I had to zoom this area out, and once again it did not disappoint. Not because there's a whole lot to see outside of the area, but because it has really excellent geometry and the environment is just so massive in general that to see it zoomed out just looks really nice. And this is why I'm including so many zoom outs, not because I'm short on content, but because the environments are so much the selling point of this game that it's almost criminal to leave any out, which I'm gonna have to, but I'm trying to include as many as I can. So, here's a fun little memory-saving technique that the developers use. You may have noticed while playing Xenoblade, like you're seeing the environment render off in the distance. Well, you're actually only half right. What the developers thought would work okay is having low-resolution textures start off in the distance, and as you work your way closer, that low-resolution texture just turns into a 3D model. Now, you can admire the effort when it's up close, but from far away, it doesn't quite look the way that I think they intended it to. Now, like I said earlier in the episode, there's not too many areas of the game where the cutscenes show you some really funny stuff when you zoom the camera out, but there are exceptions. Like, for example, the first time that Shulk meets Alvis. You can see a lot of similar stuff to what it looked like in the Skyward Sword episode, where the legs were off camera, therefore the legs do not animate, as well as positioning the character in weird ways to get a desired pose and angle.
They're here. Huh?
Now this is a beta element, and beta stuff is not really my thing. If you want to look at beta stuff, you should check out Beta 64. Although he hasn't done a Xenoblade episode yet. What's going on, dude? But anyways, this is the left shoulder of the Bionis. And while I'm not here to give you a history lesson about the left shoulder being left out of the game, I am here to give you a zoom out of this popular beta map. As you can see, those giant points that are above the area are ever present on the Bionis itself whenever you look at it in a cutscene or off in the distance. And although all the buildings are dilapidated, you can actually see some farm fields over on the northernmost point, as well as a wooden bridge that wraps around the pillars that goes to those points. It's very interesting that such an area even exists on the game's disc when it's nearly done. But one thing that you can notice by zooming out the map like this is that there is no point of reference. As you can see, all the distance textures is just generic grassland, whereas normally if you looked off in the distance, you could see the rest of the Bionis in relation to where you are on the Bionis, as again you'll see more of as we go further into the episode. So one thing that was a great pleasure this week was that I was able to remove a lot of textures out of this game. And one of the things that yielded the best results was removing people's beards for some reason. Like for example, the village chief Dunga has a pretty epic beard. And so if we were to remove his beard, we can actually find out that for some reason there's actually a mouth-moving animation for when the character speaks in cutscenes. Now, nobody's ever gonna see that. Ever. It's completely covered by beard. I guess this is just one of those instances where the developers just wanted to be immersed in the world themselves.
Your little puns will be taken care of.
Now, I was talking about some areas that were some of my favorite areas. This right here, though, is my favorite. Aerith Sea, which houses the kingdom that Melia comes from, is the most gorgeous area in the game in my mind. It's why it's my thumbnail for this episode. It's so great looking. Now basically this is the back area of the Bionis. All those little spikes on each side, that represents his wings essentially. And as we go further and further back, you can see the Bionis head, followed by, you guessed it, Mechonis. Only this time Mechonis is not looking so hot. I guess this area is a little too graphically intensive for him, so they had to scale him down into a texture. But this is what I was talking about earlier with the beta area. It's that even an area as big as this has a point of reference. It tries to get you to see both the Bionis and the Mechonis off in the distance somewhere. In the kingdom of Alchemoth, we can see the king speaking to his disciples, his people. Now, the reason why we're taking a look at them today is because if we pause the cutscene and move the camera on down to see what those people look like, turns out they're also low-resolution textures. Now, when you look at them through the glass, it turns their textures, for whatever reason, clear. However, if they're viewed from outside the glass, they are solid. Now we're going to do a zoom out of Valak Mountain, and the reason that we're going to do a zoom out for this is, well, once again, it's rather majestic looking, which we can never seem to get that past Xenoblade. And because of the other reason is that you can actually see that's the Bionis' arm. Although you can't see much beyond that, it is completely in the shape of an arm, and it's connected to a shoulder socket. And also, keep it in the back of your mind what this environment looks like when we move on to the next zoom out. And now we're gonna trim some more beards with Zanza over here. Zanza's got a beard big enough to wear as a wedding dress, so we're gonna trim that for him. And when we do, you can see that his body underneath is fully textured, as well as his face. His face actually has a short beard underneath that big beard. Yeah, that's kind of like my beard. So now we're gonna look at the Bionis' finger, and as I'm zooming out, you can almost swear that the game intended you to have a magic camera like I do. It's frankly crazy how much there is to see outside of this one little area that you're in when you're actually playing the game. Like for example, Bionis' arm is still snowy, although that snow texture is placed on top of a green texture. You'll notice that it tears every once in a while as we're moving the camera around. And in the back, you can see my favorite area of Xenoblade, complete with Prison Island, of all things. Just a low-res version, but still pretty well made even if you were to get up close. Some folks want to know if there were people inside of the Mechons when they weren't being featured in a cutscene. Well, the answer is no, but the cockpit in which a character would be inside a Mechon does exist. But not always in that case either. In this one particular case, you can find the cockpit to this particular Mechon. I know you want me to say it, but I'm not going to say it. You know. I also got a request to explore the universe. Well, that's trippy, man. Well, coincidentally, you can't see the entire universe in one shot. The universe is actually so big that culling actually begins to start happening once you try to get everything into view. But what this area is made up of is just a star-spangled skybox with a half model of Jupiter, and the surrounding planets are 2D textures. So while space is too big for magic camera, there's not a lot going on in space. So here we're gonna check out the final boss of the game. I did warn there were spoilers, so I hope you're okay with that. And what we're gonna check out here is underneath his mask. I guess it's a mask helmet? We're gonna check underneath his little dome thing, and it turns out that he has a face underneath there. Well, I mean, he should have a face underneath there, but they certainly didn't have to make one for him, because you never get to see it.
And whatever happens, we'll face our future together.
Alright guys, that was the Xenoblade episode.
Xenoblade.
So at the time of this recording, I couldn't show Pat preview of the episode, but I showed him some footage, and Pat, what did you think of that?
Nice little tidbits I've seen. It was so tasty.
So anyways, guys, that was episode 44. If you want to see more episodes, we got the playlist right here. We're so tired of saying this now.
I'm sorry, the eye roll got me.
Oh, did I eye roll?
You're like, playlist.
All right, guys. I'll see you next week. Take care.